Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my good friend, John BOSCH, and we are talking Dynasty trades. I know a lot of you, like last week on the big show, we were talking about trades for redraft leagues, and like 2/3 of you said my trade deadline has already passed. That shouldn't be the case in a Dynasty league. We're going to talk about trade deadlines in just a second. John, I think, very passionate about those as well. But John, I want to get started. First off, thanks for coming back on. You've been on this show several times in the past, but it's been too long. Tell everybody what you've got going on and specifically what's going on at Fantasy Cares.
Well, it's shopping season now at Fantasy Cares. So now we get to see one of the biggest rewards that we get for all the work that we put in throughout the year. This is the time of year where you'll start seeing on your skyline or your timeline, depending on your social media platform, I guess. You'll see a bunch of pictures of people going out shopping, buying Toys for Tots and donating them. So I just got to go do one over the weekend. I got to put the pictures together and get that posted out there. Zach Reed went and did his, I think, last weekend, maybe. So his is out there, and I know you've got one coming up, and there are a lot of other people. I don't know the total number, but it's at least double-digit shoppers this year around the country. So
all over around the country. It's the most wonderful time of the year. I'm so thankful to get to be a part of Fantasy Cares throughout the year, and especially when we go do the shopping trip, like just to see what we're able to do for communities all across the country because of fantasy football. It's absolutely fantastic. Honestly, I didn't have a very good fantasy football week. It was almost a disastrous week. I was about to be eliminated in like 3 different leagues. Justice Hill's 51-yard touchdown run saved me in one league. I picked him up in the middle of the afternoon on Sunday because Noah Fant was ruled out in a tight end premium dynasty league, and just started Justice Hill because he was the only guy that I could start. And man, did he save my bacon for at least 1 week in at least one league. On today's show, it's trades. We're buying what we're offering. And then I kind of wanted to talk about something a little bit different. Like, should we hold them? Some vets who teams that have maybe recently fallen out of contention may be trying to decide, like, do I need to sell this guy? Can I hold him until next year? I think I might be a contender next year. We'll talk about a few of those. If you're here in the chat and you have a recent dynasty trade that you would like for John and I to grade, we'll do that towards the very end of the show. I've got a few of those from Blue Sky as well. As a reminder, if you're streaming live on Twitter, if you're watching on Twitter and you want to ask a question, well, you can't do that on Twitter. You're going to have to come over to YouTube. You're going to have to get in the chat, ask the question in the chat, and we'll grade your trades there. We always start, or we usually start, I should say at this point, with 3 questions for our guest. I've asked John a lot of questions over the years. I think I've asked him this one before, but we got a lot more listeners than we used to. So I want to let John put his opinion out there. What is your philosophy on trade deadlines in a dynasty league as a commissioner?
So I actually started out with the trade deadline in every league that I commissioned long ago. And I unilaterally abolished it a few years ago in all my leagues. I didn't put it to a vote because this was not something. I mean, you're going to get half the people that want it one way, half the people that want it another way. It's a pretty split decision. So I just made the decision as the commissioner. My reasoning is basically it allows everybody to really participate the entire time. There's not 3, 4, 6 weeks where only half of the teams get to play the most fun part of Dynasty. And it's also, allowing teams that are out of the playoffs to make trades to people in the playoffs. Yeah, that's the one they're going to get their best advantage off of somebody. So I made that switch. I saw it. I played in some leagues where there was no trade deadline. It did not kill the league, believe it or not. So, a lot of it comes back to having good managers in your leagues. And as long as you do that and you've got the right people in there and people are responsible anyways, like, you're not really going to harm anything. And it leads to a lot more fun. Justice Hill, go get him. No, I'm just kidding. I can't even make the argument that he's got actual trade value now, even after that for you. But you will see guys get picked up and like traded for a third or something, off the waiver wire, things like that. It just happens, and it's a little bit of a bonus.
Last week, I started hearing rumblings, and so I speculatively picked up Brandon Allen in a league. hoping to turn him into a third round pick. Wasn't able to do it. I just picked up Tyrod Taylor, hoping that Aaron Rodgers just falls on his face this week and we get to see Taylor the last month of the season. I think this comment is probably a little bit tongue in cheek, but also like, this is what people say. In theory, I agree with no deadline, but I don't trust my league mates. And I get that. I'm going to assume that his league mates are actually his friends. Like if you're playing with people that are not your friends and you don't trust them, you should probably just find a different league. But if you're talking about playing in a league with your friends and you don't trust them, I understand that. I'm just going to follow up to question 1. We're not moving to question 2 yet. If let's say your league is just like adamant, like we need to have a trade deadline, would you say like end of the regular season is when you would set it?
So I mean, that's if I were going to put one in,
Right.
that would be it for me. Like once you get to the playoffs, all right, half the teams are out of the they're not playing week to week anyways. Even though I would still say just have something better in your league where you have a high scoring week, where everybody gets to play for something, have a consolation bracket, have something so that everybody gets to keep playing. But I mean, that would be probably where if I were forced to put a trade deadline into my leagues, I would cut it off at the end of the regular season.
Two quick fun stories about no trade deadline leagues. The first is John's Auction Addicts League that I've thoroughly enjoyed, even though neither he nor I have been any good for the last 3 years. I don't know if we ever will be, but year 1, I believe it might have been year 2. I was really good and I made it to the championship game, and Michael Thomas was the best wide receiver in fantasy football back then. And he got hurt week 15 or week 16. And I thought, I got to, flags fly forever. I got to go win a chip. And so I traded him for Cooper Kupp, this guy who was having a good finish to the season, but it was nowhere close to Michael Thomas. And I didn't win the championship. Cooper Kupp
probably looked like a terrible deal for you.
I was sick to my stomach the entire off season over the fact that I just dealt future Hall of Famer Michael Thomas for Cooper Kupp, who just had like 8 good games. And of course, Cooper Kupp goes on to be awesome. And Michael Thomas was never a must start wide receiver again. Those types of things happen. But first off, people get terrible value immediately after the season's over. But also that's why we shouldn't have trade vetoes, because we don't know. Like, unless somebody's trying to collude, we really don't know. And then the second thing is Jacob Gibbs started a tight end university dynasty league this year. You must start 2 tight ends, and it's tight end premium. And it's been a lot of fun. It's the league that Justice Hill just won me last week. And I don't think anyone else has realized yet that there's no trade deadline in that league, because there's a couple of rules that Jacob kind of accidentally set. So I'm looking forward to really like blowing up the chat when I make a trade during the playoffs and everybody's like, I didn't know you could do that. It's going to be fantastic. Read your rules, folks.
Yes.
Okay. Important. Question number 2. For teams that are dealing points away, those rebuilding teams, and they're trading players, creating open roster spots, what are the types of assets that you're looking to replace them with on your bench? I mean, a lot of these leagues, there's not much on the waiver wire. You might trade 3 vets away and now you get to go add 3 players, but what are you looking for?
I mean, if I'm dealing away players, I know everybody says picks, which yes, there's always a good thing to do with getting picks for players, especially if you're trading away, veteran points and you're rebuilding. Picks are great. That's not my first target usually. I would rather go for an injured player. Give me any player that is out for the rest of the season that is already kind of a known. To me, that's a much more stable asset than even the pick. The pick, you're looking at a 50-50 shot.
Right.
If they're, a first round pick, if they're below, if it's a second rounder, your hit rate isn't all that great. Just on average. Maybe somebody feels they're way better than the average. I don't. Like, right. I've done enough rookie drafts and stuff to this point where I do not feel like I am better than the average at picking the player and being right. Who knew that Bo Nix would actually be the right quarterback and Caleb Williams might not have been? Like, what can you do? So for me, I don't always try to go just for picks. I want to go for injured players. That's where, when I'm dealing away points, I want a player that I know is going to be a starter next year. Like, right. And the only reason that person's getting rid of them is because they got hurt. And
Yes.
I will give them, here's your points for the rest of this year. Thank you. Let me help you. I will give you those points. You send me back your players that aren't playing. So that's where I start.
Makes a lot of sense. Our third question comes from Brandon on Blue Sky. As a disgruntled Marvin Harrison Jr. manager, speaking of rookie hit rate, is there any reason to consider moving on? What 2025 pick or picks would be an equivalent?
So for me, it would be really hard for me to just move on for picks. I don't think there's still just pick equivalents. I mean, granted, like the 101, yeah, probably going to be pretty happy getting the 101 or the 102. Other than that, I'm just going to hold him. I'm not somebody who wants to give up on Marvin Harrison Jr. level player this early. I think it's a loss if you do. I understand the frustration because I have Marvin Harrison Jr. on a lot of teams. But I'm not just giving up. I still think he is just as talented as I thought he was a year ago. I think he's still on a team with a pretty good offense. I don't think he's being used to the best of his abilities, and maybe he's not giving the best of his ability out on the field either. So, I mean, there are definitely some issues, but I'm not ready to give up on him. There used to be a time way back when where there wasn't like a third game breakout expectation of rookies. It was usually like third year wide receivers breakout. So there's still some growing pains. I know things do move faster now. I mean, just that's how it works. People come in and you're expected to be better right away. But I'm not ready to give up on him. I'm doing a lot of trying to get Marvin Harrison Jr. right now. I want to add him.
I think we're seeing, like, we did a show a couple of weeks ago, 2024 yo-yos, like guys that moved all around in the league and or all around the rankings. And JSN is the obvious comp here. Now, it was easier to believe with JSN that this might happen because the problem was that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were there. And there's not a wide receiver that's preventing Marvin Harrison Jr. from getting targets. There's a tight end who's preventing him from getting targets. I was so frustrated watching the end of that Cardinals game because they finally got into like, we need to go YOLO mode, down 10 with 4 minutes left. And it was just dump offs to running backs and Trey McBride 4 yards downfield. It's like, man, you guys all season long, all you've wanted to do is have Marvin run up and down the sidelines. Do that now and throw him a couple of YOLO balls and see if he scores. I haven't really downgraded Marvin Harrison that much in my dynasty rankings. I did have him ahead of Neighbors coming into the year. I have him behind Neighbors now. I think Harrison was my number 5 wide receiver in August. I think he's my number 7 wide receiver now. If you're a contender, he's obviously lower than that, but I would not be moving on from Marvin Harrison Jr. And if you're selling to a contender that somehow has him, yeah, that'd be a great type of guy to try to acquire for a lot of points. Let's take our first break, and then I want to get into some vets that we might be buying.
CBS Sports HQ, giving you college football coverage unlike anyone else.
We're talking Big Ten.
Pre- and post-game coverage.
Are you encouraged with the way that this team responded?
Along with breaking news.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
Highlights and expert analysis.
That streak could be in jeopardy here.
Sure. What was your main takeaway from this game? How impressive was his domination?
That really changed the football game.
Let's go ahead and have some more fun.
Another wild ending.
The chaos continues.
Turn to CBS Sports HQ.
So we're going to start off, like, coming up soon. John is going to give us some of his favorite buys for contenders at cost. But I had 4 guys that I was really curious about whether John was buying them or not. The first one at quarterback is Matthew Stafford. He has been basically a top 12 quarterback when both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are healthy. We have no reason to expect they'll be anything other than healthy for the last month of the fantasy season, or 6 weeks, however many weeks we have left. And he's the type of player that if somebody who's just fallen out of contention has them, they should be willing to move on pretty quickly. Stafford could fall off of a cliff at any moment. I often say in Superflex leagues, like, if you're a starting quarterback who I don't think is terrible, you're worth a first-round pick. Are you buying Matthew Stafford right now?
Not at the price of a first-round pick. And I mean, every player that you gave here on this list, they're all buys and sells, quite frankly. I mean, it really does come down to what their price is, and then it comes down to what your team's situation is. And I love the group that you picked because they're all kind of in the same exact range. where they're not guys that I'm going out shopping for a first. So if I'm going to spend a first on a quarterback, I'm going to look a little bit differently than Matthew Stafford. I guess in the scenario where like I am, clearly the favorite to win the league, I don't think I'm going to be needing that quarterback. So that's why I'm not spending my first there on a quarterback, even though he's probably close to worth that. If I'm truly that competitive in the league, I already know that. And unless my quarterback got hurt and I'm trying to replace that for somehow, I don't really want to use my investment there on Matthew Stafford. I only have so many of my own firsts. So assuming it's the 112 because, I'm going to win, I'm still not going to spend it on Stafford just because I'm not going to win if I'm already there. I'm doing it with two better quarterbacks and he's not getting put in my lineup.
I think you bring up a good point, and I don't ever feel comfortable speculating on I'm going to win, but I do at this time of year start looking at one thing. Have I locked up a bye?
Yeah.
Because if I've locked up a bye, then at least I know my pick's not going to be better than 9.
Yep.
And it's probably going to be hopefully going to be 11 or 12. I only have to win one game to get it to 11 or 12.
Yep.
And I just made a trade, and we'll talk about it after we get through these names, that I'm a little bit nauseous about this morning, even though I have clearly the best team in the league now, but I'm sitting in the 7th seed. Okay. So number 2, maybe part of that trade. Joe Mixon has been one of the, you could argue that he's been the best running back in fantasy football this year if Saquon Barkley didn't exist. But he just had a really difficult matchup against the Titans, fell on his face. His playoff schedules, Dolphins at the Chiefs and Ravens. He's of the age as a running back where we can't count on anything beyond the next 6 to 7 weeks. Are you buying Joe Mixon?
Not at the price of my first. Again, look, I would love to add him down the stretch, but I really feel like I'm only adding him for those 3 playoff weeks. Hopefully only 2 if I'm the team on bye. So I'm really paying a lot then for just 2 weeks. And I'm looking to get him any other way. If I can flip one of the younger running backs that kind of hasn't done much this year, plus like a second or something like that. There's like Ray Davis from Buffalo, something like that. What
about Jonathan Brooks in a second?
I don't think I'd want to do that.
Okay. No, I'm going to throw some things at you because you said no first.
Even though he's done nothing too, I feel like he's worth a first. So
are there any
value equivalent first
injured wide receivers who are out for the year that you would not trade for Mixon? Would you trade Ayuk?
If I'm contending, probably.
What about Rashee Rice?
Probably. You're going to ask about one that is a guy that I just straight up love, and I don't want to give him for anything, but I probably would too. Olave. I don't want to give any of the receivers for him. What I really want to look for is another running back because I would rather keep wide receivers forever and ever and ever. And that's exactly who I'm targeting. If I have Mixon and I'm trying to get rid of Mixon, right. I am going to the Ayuk manager. I am going to the Olave manager. I'm going to the Ray Rice manager. They're going to look at putting Joe Mixon into their playoff lineup. That's points. They're not getting points from the other guy. So if I'm involved in that deal, I would much prefer being on the other side of it, even though that means I'm not in the playoffs, unfortunately.
Okay, so speaking of wide receivers you can keep forever and ever and ever, he's been kept forever and ever and ever. Kupp when he plays, he's a top 12 wide receiver.
Yeah.
We've only got a few weeks. He has to stay healthy now. Are you buying Cooper Kupp?
We're still talking about this same price range of a late first is an overpayment for all of these players, right. But ultimately you're not getting them for a late second. So right. That's what you have to offer right now is that late first. I would probably give it for Cooper Kupp if I really felt like he was going to be the difference maker. It's easier for me to give my late first for him because he's a receiver and I expect to have more than just this year out of him. I don't know that I expect that out of Mixon at all. Stafford, I hope to get that, but I don't really know what's going to come of him. And of course, he then affects Cooper Kupp. But I think Cooper Kupp would be effective even with other quarterbacks. I don't think Stafford's going anywhere, but I think his production could at some point slip pretty quickly. So I would be a little bit more into assuming I'm getting the 112. Like that's where I'm valuing it at. I'm giving the 112 for Cooper Kupp, and I'm getting the production in the playoffs, which I hope comes. And then I'm still getting another probably year or two of production out of Cooper Kupp. Like that's not a bad return. I've had a lot of 1.12 picks in dynasty leagues.
Yeah.
And you don't get a lot out of them a lot of times. I'm probably trying to do the same thing with this as I was doing with Mixon is I'm going to look for like a younger wide receiver that's not really producing for me, right, that had a little cachet, and seeing if I can work my way up to it, up the top.
Final one, and I think probably at this point, there's two names I could be giving, following the trend, but I'm not going to say George Kittle. I am going to say Travis Kelce, who, I mean, he's no Noah Gray, but still a top 10 tight end. Are you buying Travis Kelce?
Yeah.
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 The Kelce and Kupp is a yes.
Yeah, I mean those two are already on so many of my roster, so I'm definitely biased. It's just I've always been fans of them. I will always be fans of them. I never have a problem putting them in my lineups. I'm happy with their production as long as they're healthy. I mean, Kelce has had some weeks where he's disappointing me this year. That doesn't even make me question checking the box to put him in my starting lineup for the next week. So any given week, of the people on this list, I think Kelce is probably the one that has the biggest chance to go out and score, like, two or three touchdowns in a game, have 100 yards and 10 catches. Like, you need that in the playoffs. Even if you have a good team, you're playing another good team. To win in the fantasy playoffs, you have to have a guy that just goes off some weeks. I don't think I'm going to get that from Mixon. I don't think Mixon's going to have like a go-off day. I don't think Stafford's going to have a go-off day. Kupp could, but I think it's a little less likely. Of these four that you listed here, if I'm going after a player that I think has the highest possible upside over those playoff weeks, it's Travis Kelce. Like, he's the one that could give me just an automatic advancement.
I'm going to test you. You've got a team that's right, like first or second, but you're not sure you're the best. Somebody offers you Kelce for Kyle Pitts in your second.
Oh, I'm taking Kyle Pitts. I want the Kyle Pitts in my second. I'll take Kyle Pitts straight up compared to Kelce. Like,
there is
never going to change.
Like, however good you think your 12-year-old dog is that has stood by your side through everything and defended you from robbers and helps you take him out hunting and he does everything with you. No creature on this earth has been more loyal than John Bosch has been to Kyle Pitts.
I've actually done the Kelce to Pitts and Pitts to Kelce. I've been on both sides of it, like one for one. I've done both those deals because, I think it was last year I traded Pitts for Kelce for the play. Was it last year? But like the year before that, I traded Kelce for Pitts and so they are very intertwined on my rosters because I've swapped them back and forth. But like for all of these players, I don't really want to give my first. I want to get something in a second, like another player in a second to try and get to them. Giving my first would feel like a loss. I would hope to try and get something else back at least. Another like old wide receiver that might go out and be a bench player for me and fill in an injury situation if I had to. So I think a first is too much for all of them. But if I have to give it for somebody, I'm going to give it for Kelce here.
So I told Heath's happy dynasty story with Justice Hill. Heath's sad dynasty story is probably my most important league. 14-team dynasty league with the people here at CBS. I think this is year 6 or 7. I've not won it yet. I've lost in the championship game twice, including last year. This year, coming into this week, second in points, in 4th place, 1 game out of the 1 seed. And the team that I was behind, I had more points than. So if I just made up a game on them, I could have it's 7 teams make the playoffs. Only 1 person gets a bye. I traded my 2025 first, my 2026 first for Joe Mixon and Travis Kelce and Keenan Allen and a pair of 4ths. And this gives me a team with Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, and Joe Mixon as my top 3 running backs. And I've got Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Travis Kelce. Like, it's clearly the best team in the league. And I lost this week.
Just got to win.
And I lost this week. and
Of
I
course.
fell to the 7th spot.
Oh,
Now,
no.
7 teams make the playoffs.
Okay.
So I still think I'm going to make the playoffs. I'm favored by 52 this week. But like just a crushing blow to give up a pair of firsts. I would do it again. Like in a 14-team league, Mixon and Kelsey, and even Keenan Allen's a starter in a 3-wide receiver league with 2 flexes.
He was the exact player that I was talking about when I said maybe an old receiver that goes on the bench, but I push it into my starting lineup if need be. I was almost saying Keenan Allen's name.
But it's important to remember that like no matter how good you think your team is, wins over the next couple of weeks are not guaranteed. The better team loses probably 40% of the time in this game that we love so much. Okay, I put you under the pressure for these. Would you buy?
I just want to double check, because if you win, those picks are the 114 in 2025,
right?
And then probably a decent one in 2026. Oh, if you miss the playoffs or you go out first, that's like the 106 and 107, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
that's a big swing. Oh my. I like it. I mean, I like it. I play that same style where, look, once I'm going for it, I am going for it.
Yeah.
To hell with the future. I'll figure it out later. I want to win now.
Right.
Oh, that's a big swing in a 14-teamer, though.
It is a big swing, and I'm a little nauseous again. So why don't you make me feel better? Tell me some players that you are trying to buy, your favorite buys at cost right now.
All righty. So we actually I didn't know you were coming at the at the other group with like late first, but that's what I went with, because you asked about contender buys at cost. So I figured this is the time of year I'm giving up my first if I need to.
Right.
You want one from each position. Quarterback, again, I feel like I'm probably pretty set if I'm truly going to be a real-time contender in a super flex dynasty. But the quarterback I'm giving my first for right now easily is Baker. Like if I can go out and get Baker for my first, even if it's my first and second, I'm really happy to do that. He's not going anywhere. I like the production that he's given me this year. He relatively affordable, like at the cost of a first. Usually that's going to get you somebody more in the Matt Stafford lane. And I think Baker's got a higher upside in the future. So if I'm giving up my first and I'm looking for a quarterback, Baker's the first one that I'm actually going after.
And he was actually on in the next group. So let's just go ahead and do this now.
Oh,
let's say you just fell out of contention and you have Baker as your QB. Is he somebody you feel like you need to sell, or can you hold him?
I'm holding him. I am really happy with Baker Mayfield as my QB2 this year, next year, probably the year after that, but that's so far down the road that like it really doesn't matter.
Okay.
I have no problem with Baker Mayfield as my QB2 this year.
I mostly agree as well. And who would have thought we would have said that 18 months ago? Who is your favorite running back to buy?
Running back, I mean, let's face it, it's almost December. Is there any running back other than Derrick Henry that you go out and acquire for the fantasy playoffs? Alvin Kamara is kind of like the 1B answer to this question. Just because if there's going to be a guy that goes out and scores 50 points in fantasy playoffs, it's going to be Alvin Kamara. I mean, he can do it. He's done it before. Everybody remembers it. It feels great when he does it and he's on your team. It feels terrible when you're playing against him and you're automatically out that week. But Derrick Henry, just the consistency with him, what he does over the last month of the season, every year, just it never fails. If I have to give up my first, I'd rather give it up for Derrick Henry than Joe Mixon easily. So
I like that. I will just say in Kamara's favor, Packers, Raiders, Buccaneers in the fantasy playoffs. I could absolutely
nobody else on his team except Taysom Hill,
Yeah, those two might combine for 100 each week in those 3 games. Do you have a wide receiver you're targeting?
Yeah. So at this point now, I'm like over the past few weeks, I was going after Addison and Waddle, and it would have sounded great because they both finally boomed and they looked great. But unfortunately, I don't think you can get them as easily now for just a first. So one thing I would like to do with my late first now is I don't treat it as if I'm going for a receiver, I don't really treat it as just a stopgap. I want to give up a first to a rebuilding team. I want to go get Olave. I want to go get Rashee Rice. I don't know if I can get them for just a first, but if they've just been sitting on a team that is somewhere in the middle or something like that, or somebody at the end, they might be already turning that page to looking for those firsts. doesn't look great next year when that first is the 110, 111, 112.
Right.
You're definitely not going to get Olave for that. But you can send it right now and it might go through. Like if they're somebody that is only thinking about recent activity and they're seeing a first, hey, they can get out from underneath, Olave and all the injury concerns that go along with him right now, and they get a first back. That's great. They got a first for him. Congratulations. I'm hoping that first turns into the 110, 111, 112, and then I basically paid that for Olave just a little bit in advance. So that's how I attack receiver as a contender at this point. If I'm looking to shore up my lineup, I'm not doing it with my first. Like I'm just not doing that because it's not going to get me a guy that's going to be doing what I want. So I'll just go out and if I have to pay a second to get DeAndre Hopkins or Jerry Jeudy, something like that, where not quite as valuable, but I'm only looking for a rental over the next few weeks, and I'm hopefully paying the 211 or 212 for it. That's fine. It feels like an overpay, but look, that's part of the downside of waiting. The longer you wait, the more things are going to get expensive. So that's usually how I approach if I have to get a wide receiver fill in.
And then tight end.
Tight end is Pitts. It's Pitts and Laporta. Give me Pitts and Laporta right now. Like Laporta had an awesome rookie year, right? And then sophomore year, kind of a little bit down on the value. I'm just going to continue to remember the rookie years for these tight ends, and I'm not going to get down on them. So can you imagine if Brock Bowers doesn't come out and crush next year, and then again this trend of great rookie year followed by a sophomore slump?
I'm not even sure we have to wait until next year. If Desmond Ridder starts the last 7 weeks of the season,
that's right.
He may do the same thing to Brock Bowers that he did to Kyle Pitts.
Oh yeah, that's true. But Pitts and Laporta, I'm going out and I'm going after them right now. I mean, I still think both of them have very long careers ahead of them of being very productive tight ends that I'm happy to check in my starting lineup box every single week. Pitts has been fine for me this year. I've started him several times, even though I wish he'd always be more. He's never been terrible. He's been okay this year.
So that is Kyle Pitts and Sam Laporta. Let's talk about three guys. We already did Baker Mayfield. It's kind of we're switching gears a little bit. Let's talk to these teams that maybe just fell out of the fantasy playoffs, not tankers, but they thought they were contenders. And it turns out this year we're not. We still think we are next year though.
Stinking injuries. It's always the injuries.
Should we keep them? And we'll start. And generally speaking, this guy, John Bosch, we're talking to today, if I say the name of a running back, he says no if you're not trying to win the championship in the next 3 weeks. But Ken Walker has had a fantastic year. His coaching staff loves him. He's still young. He's not going anywhere next year, but he's a running back. Should we keep him?
He's still a running back. I answered the question on the sheet that you gave me, and I wrote maybe.
Maybe.
What can I get back for him? If I'm going to keep running backs, I do want it to be somebody as good as Kenneth Walker. But if I can swap him into a wide receiver, probably going to want the wide receiver that's at the equal value to him. I just don't ever want to be invested in running backs because it's so easy for them to lose some value real quickly. Basically, they already drafted one running back to bring in to play with. It didn't work out, but they've done it once. They might do it again. You never know. And it doesn't hurt when a wide receiver gets another wide receiver in the room.
Right.
The theory there is, there's just more balls to go around, less coverage, things like this. But if any other running back enters a running back room, it just gives this immediate hit to every other running back that's there. Whether it's fair or not, it happens. And in order for me to play the way that I do, which is a lot of trading and a lot of just going on the value and trying to maximize my value and increase it wherever I can, I would like to switch over to the wide receiver that is of equal value to Kenneth Walker. If I can't get that, if I'm going to have to downgrade or if I'm going to trade him for picks, I'll just keep Kenneth Walker. That's pretty easy.
We talked about those injured guys earlier. Would you trade him for Olave?
Yep.
Would you trade him for Rice?
I would.
Would you trade him for Ayuk?
Yep. If I'm out, I'm out.
Right.
So yeah, I would. I would just always rather. A little tougher there.
Okay.
But maybe if I got Godwin in a second, or maybe if I gave Ken Walker in a second for Godwin in a first, then I love that. Like that's where I would probably want to go. See if I can get something like that.
Terry McLaurin is, I think it's fair to say, tracking towards the best season of his career. He's also 29 years old, and there's some things about his production this year that don't look the most sustainable, like a 90-yard touchdown with 45 seconds on the clock when the Cowboys just decided not to tackle. Terry McLaurin, should we keep him, or are we trying to sell him to a contender?
No, I'm not keeping him anymore. I mean, at this point, I think I can probably get them. This is the last chance I'm going to be able to get like good value. And even though I do keep a lot of wide receivers just until they retire, and he's probably in that category. But if I can get something good enough for him, if I can offer Terry McLaurin in a second to get like not the super contender first, not the clear, obvious, championship contender, but like your team in 7th place.
Yeah.
If I can target you and I can give you like my second,
I don't have any picks left, Sean. They're all gone.
But that's who I'm targeting. I'm targeting that team that's either like one game out of the playoffs or one game in the playoffs. And I'm kind of rolling the dice and hoping that I'm giving up Terry McLaurin and ending up with like the 106. If I get a Terry McLaurin and I end up with like the 112, I don't feel great about that because I'd probably rather just keep him and continue to play him for a couple more years. But if I have the chance to make that deal where I can get a guy that, or get a pick from somebody that's marginal playoff team, whether they're in or out, that's the kind of first I'm looking to get back for him. Even if like I'm adding a second to that, I'm not getting that.
We've got
straight up. I don't think.
Another guy about the same age, also maybe about to have the best year of his career, but not valued the same by the dynasty community, and that's Courtland Sutton. And so you're probably not getting more than a second for him, I don't think. In fact, I've been trying to get a second for him in one league where I'm out of it, and nobody's biting. So Courtland Sutton for a second, do you keep him, or do you just take that second and be happy?
I'm just keeping him. I'm not giving him up for a late second. The late second that I'm going to draft next year is probably a wide receiver that's probably not going to end up being in my starting lineups. Right now, it looks like Courtland Sutton's going to be in my starting lineups next year. So I'll just hold him. He's a guy that if I can package him up with something to move up, if there's an injury down the stretch here and I can plug in Courtland Sutton and, give some other player and get the injured player, something like that back from somebody that's in the playoffs. That would be my preferred method. Take a little advantage of hopefully Courtland Sutton being healthy and producing down the stretch, and somebody suffering a bad injury. Not the individual player person, but some manager suffering an injury. Let me be clear. Take a little advantage of them and help them with giving them Courtland Sutton.
Let's take a short break. We'll come back with a commissioner question because nobody's better to answer those than John Bosch, and then we'll grade your trades.
If you love football, this is the best time of the year.
This is as big as it gets.
The stuff of absolute dreams.
So Alex from Blue Sky, this is going to cause probably some angst amongst the listeners. I may get an angry email for even considering this question because everybody hates collusion. I hate collusion as well. John hates collusion. He says, a manager wants to trade some short-lived assets to another team. Brandon Allen, Amir Abdullah, and some other guy I forgot. And he wants to send them to a team that's facing a team that he holds their pick. So he is trying to help this team win because he wants that team that they're playing against to lose so he gets a better draft pick next year. Is accepting nothing or one fab collusion? How much is fair?
So you're right. I do hate collusion, but I love strategy. Right. And so I don't think this is actually even collusion. There will be somebody that cries that it's collusion.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
going to be the person that's going to get knocked out of the playoffs because of it. 100%. Well, guess what? They had the option to come get these players and prevent the deal from happening. So it's not like this deal was only being sent.
Well,
I think this is a gray area.
It does sound most likely like that. nobody else does have that chance because nobody else is playing the team that this guy wants to lose this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm the manager that's going to do this, I'm going to be very open about it, and I'm going to put it in the chat and say, "Hey, I am trading these players to this team." I'm going to say, like, if it's me, I'm going to want a third back, something like that. No,
Dave is already angry at us.
Collusion. That's the definition of strategy, is what this is. The definition of collusion is like, hey, if I let you win, give me half of the winnings. To me, that's collusion. That's straight up cheating to try and win the league and getting money. In this case, whoever's giving up these players is getting something in return. Probably. It might not work. Like the team could still lose, and it's not going to affect the outcome of the draft pick anyway. So like, there's still some chance involved. I don't like it, but as a strategist, I am somebody that definitely looks at this kind of thing. So I don't think I would do it in such an obvious manner. I think I would, if there's 4th round picks, I don't care. Take the 4th round pick. If the fab or the blind bid rolls over to the next year or something like that, then yeah, just give me some fab. I don't care because I can use it next year.
So,
but I don't think you can get nothing back. You have to get something that helps you with next year.
My line is that accepting nothing, if in my leagues, is probably not okay. Like, I don't even feel strong about that. Accepting nothing is not okay. I'm going to say, like, there's got to be some exchange of value.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in leagues where you can trade fab, it gets really difficult. I think what you said, especially when we're talking about Amir Abdullah and Brandon Allen, like whatever the last, I've got leagues where you have 6 rookie picks or 8 rookie picks. Like a round 6 rookie pick is something of value. And you couldn't have got a round 6 pick for Amir Abdullah and Brandon Allen 3 weeks ago. So you've made profit on those guys. I'd have more trouble and see, this is where I think Dave, and it has to be reasonable or defendable. Those are not objective things. So I don't want to put like, there has to be something of value. And man,
I mean, moving a draft pick up that you own is
but thank you. Like, generally when we get
this is a really gray area. It's a fun question from Alex.
Generally when we get these fantasy cops questions, they're pretty black and white. That one is, especially when you talk about like one fab, it doesn't feel good.
It's still more. It's more than what you paid to get these to add them. I doubt Brandon.
Well,
Allen,
that's the other thing is like
one fab. Like they were available to the entire league. Like anybody could have gotten them. Nobody did it.
We're in the Auction Addicts League, and it's possible that Brandon Allen and Amir Abdullah may have gone for 5 each. And so somebody just paid 10 fab and then turned around that week and traded them for 1 fab. That does not feel very good at all.
Yeah, that would be, but at the same time, like at least again, if you're let's say it's me or you who are way out of it, and we spent the $10 on these 2 guys thinking we were going to be able to flip them to get 25.
Right. Yeah.
Well, at least
that's the way it works. We do have a couple of trade questions. One from the chat here: would you trade Chris Olave in a late second for Brian Thomas Jr.?
Easily. Yeah, I am big time on the Brian Thomas Jr. train. So
I would rather have Brian Thomas Jr. than Chris Olave. And definitely if I'm a contender.
Yeah, I thought it was Chris Olave and a second. You had to pay up from Olave to get the BTJ. I was
that's right.
Yeah.
So I did have a couple of trade questions that were sent in via Blue Sky. Let's see if I can find those just real fast. Mike asks, can you ask him what hypothetically would be the lowest offer he would take for Lamar Jackson in a vampire league with a modified best ball aspect? Hypothetically.
Mike, you don't have it.
Mike
is asking about this. This is Daddy's Home asking this question about a very specific league where I just acquired Lamar Jackson because I had the Vampires steal rights. And so I stole Lamar Jackson and he wants him. Mike, you probably don't have it.
Yeah.
You might be able to come get some other players. Lamar's
Richard asks for a grade the trade. Somebody traded a 2026 second a 2025 third for Calvin Ridley, and a 2026 fourth.
I'll take the Ridley side. I mean, a 2026 second was the most valuable pick there. Like, yeah, that's so far out and kind of a dart throw as it is. I'd rather have Calvin Ridley on my team than that 26 second. I can probably turn around and get a 26 second in a lot of other fashions between now and then if I really need it.
I think I would I'd give that an A-. I like it.
Yeah,
I like it a lot.
good trade.
Would traded Joe Mixon for Chuba Hubbard, Tyrone Tracy, and a 2025 third, half PPR, tight end premium, 12-team league. Mixon for Chuba, Tracy, and a 2025 third. It does not say whether this was before or after. I think Tyrone Tracy just fumbled again. So Hubbard, Tracy, I assume this is not a contender. So I'll tell you, as John's trying to calculate in his head, the thing he doesn't like about it is
it's all
not a
backs.
contender and you're trading for running backs. What are you doing that for? Get rid of those running backs. But Hubbard, Tracy, and a 2025 third. What do you think, John?
I mean, I think it's very, if you are contending, I'd rather have the Mixon side. If you're not, I understand breaking Mixon down to get a couple of guys that could end up being just as productive and valuable as Mixon next year. So, I mean, a B. I mean, it works for both ways. So, like, I don't think anybody overwhelmingly won or lost this trade. I would rather have Mixon if I'm going for the title this year. And if I'm not, I'd rather have the other players. I think they've got a little more future upside, perhaps.
Will asks what Blue Sky is, and it's a great place to talk about fantasy football, and I'm really enjoying it. And you should join me there. Effortless Shots says Marvin Harrison Jr. and an early second for Kamara, Kupp, and Devontae Adams.
I want the Marvin Harrison Jr. side here very easily for me. Like, I am not giving, even if I'm competing, I do not want to give up Marvin Harrison Jr. to acquire Kupp, Adams, and Kamara, who could end up helping me win the title. Don't get me wrong. They very much could. And I might change my tune and make that deal in 3 or 4 weeks. I don't want to make that deal right now because I would rather just wait. Because if let's say 1 or 2 of those guys get hurt between now and then, that's a big time loss. So before I make this kind of a deal, I will wait as long as possible and then still not want to do it.
Yeah, I get it because I'd rather have Kupp rest of season than Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'd rather have Kamara rest of season than Marvin Harrison Jr. But like, just looking at my dynasty trade chart, if you put the second on the other side of the deal, Marvin Harrison would still be the clear best value. I'm assuming most trade charts, like it's not enough for Harrison, but at the same time, flags do fly forever. And let's say this is one of those leagues, and I've got a lot of them, John, where Saturday's the trade deadline.
Yeah.
November 30th, no more trades. And like, you're just trying to like maybe see if you can send that early second for one of these pieces.
Yeah. I mean, that would be I would rather do that. See if I can get Kamara, throw in a 2026 second along with that early second and get Kamara or Kupp. I probably wouldn't do it for Adams. I don't really have a lot of confidence down the stretch for that team. So don't really know what's going to happen there. I'm not ready to give up Marvin Harrison Jr. like that.
Someone says that they sent a trade. Okay. 10-team PPR, 3 wide receivers, flex and super flex. Send JMO and Javonte for a 2026 first.
Just 10-team. I wish we knew where that might be. I would easily do it for anywhere like that's a non-playoff team in the 10-team. I'm assuming that they get 6 in the playoffs. So I would easily do that for like the 101 through 104. That would be very easy. If it's the 109 or 110, I kind of like Jameis Williams a decent amount, and Javonte's been okay. I I think I'd still take the first. I think that's okay. That's a fair trade to give up. It's a smash if it's a good first. If it's a late first, I feel like maybe I could have gotten a little bit more, like maybe gotten the late second thrown in as well.
Chase Brown and a third for Mixon.
It's tough. That's a good one. This is how I like to move, like to get players like Mixon. This is exactly what I was talking about before, where I don't want to give up my first. Chase Brown is probably worth close to about the same as Mixon, but I think I'd rather play Mixon down the stretch. So I would give up Chase Brown in the third, but I'm also okay just starting Chase Brown for the rest of the year too. Like, so, I mean, it doesn't feel like a deal that I really have to do. I would do this in a smash for Kamara.
But that's exactly what I was going to see. Is I would go see if I could get any of the other old running backs,
Henry. Give me either of those
that don't have the worst schedule known to man in the fantasy playoffs. Then I would like to do that. I think there's too good of a chance that Chase Brown's better than Joe Mixon in the fantasy playoffs. And then you get to next year and man, you wish you had Chase Brown instead of Joe Mixon. Two more. I'm a rebuilding team trying to get draft picks. What could I theoretically get for Aaron Jones and T. Higgins? And first off, I think like what you do for the package, but in this situation, are you trying to sell these guys together or are you trying to sell them apart?
So if I'm packaging them together, I am looking at the contending teams and I am doing whatever I can to get their injured player. Again, we'll go back to that because you're going to get a better value than that if you go after the injured player. T. Higgins, I mean, you can probably get a first for him out of playoff
I'm not
teams.
giving him up to a good team for a first personally. I'm not giving him up for the 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th pick next year. I
think I'd probably have to have the first and second with him. I'm a T. Higgins.
Right.
I love T. Higgins. The problem is I think his value is a little depressed right now. And I don't know that you're getting much more on top of like a playoff first.
Right.
I don't think you're getting a non-playoff first. Maybe if there's a playoff team that has somebody else's first, that's a good way to start looking for that. Aaron Jones, I mean, you're getting a second if you can get it. Like, I think packaging them together and looking at the injured players on the rosters of the playoff teams, that's the best way to go. Look to try and get a receiver in return and a second round pick on top of it. Send them both these players, and then you're in good shape. If you can move that for, we've said their names a bunch of times, but Olave, Ayuk, Rice, and a second. One of those receivers and a second. Yep. I like that deal quite a bit. And the person that's receiving that offer, if they're in the playoffs, they're probably going to be pretty happy to get that offer as well. And it might just be a quick accept.
And if you're a 1 year, like if you think I'm rebuilding, but I've got a chance to bounce back next year, then I'm looking for Chris Olave, or I'd be okay going to Brandon Ayuk. If I'm really like kind of starting the rebuild and it's probably 2 years away, then I'm looking for Rice and a second.
I don't think T. Higgins has to be moved off of a rebuilding team. So like,
agreed.
We might have started on a premise that we should have said, maybe keep him.
And there's been an argument in the chat about a 20-man keeper league and wanting to get his trade graded. And we're going to grade the trade. It's a 20-man keeper league. Keeper leagues are not dynasty leagues. Some of you guys are right. But Will's been a good listener, and he's always got good questions. And he told Dan that he should make a trade with me that Dan wouldn't make. So he just bought Nick Chubb and an early 8th for Jalen Wright and a late 4th and 6th. Decent value. I don't know that Nick Chubb's going to be a good running back again. So I would do that.
I have only started playing in a keeper league this year. First time ever in an actual keeper league. Right. So I don't have the biggest knowledge base on that yet. I want the 4th and the 5th round pick here.
Right.
I think those are probably the best things here.
Right.
Yeah, I don't really care about Nick Chubb for next year. I don't, the 8th round pick, assuming it was like 12-team league, you're getting to a back end starter there. So yeah, I want the 4th and 5th round pick. I'm going to get a couple of receivers there.
I think it's like a coin flip between Jalen Wright and Nick Chubb in like as a keeper next year. So like, that's a terrible thing to say. And people are going to overpay for Nick Chubb next year because we've seen all the old running backs be good this year. I don't think that like everything just changed and running backs are good until they're 32 now. It's just that we had a special class of players and we had a special year of situations. I wouldn't want to make that bet on the older backs again next year, but I'd always bet on having John Bosch on FFT Dynasty. John, thank you so much for being here. As always, thank you for everything you do with Fantasy Cares. Just real quick before you go, tell everybody how they can get involved with Fantasy Cares.
Yeah, you can follow us at Fantasy Cares Org on Twitter, the X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, as Denny would say, or Blue Sky. We are on there, and we are pretty active on both of those. You can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. You're on YouTube right now watching this. Click on over to the Fantasy Cares YouTube channel and subscribe to that. We have a lot of giveaways coming up. We're about to kick off our calendar, our Advent calendar, where we'll give away a jersey every day for the first 25 days of December. So you get to donate a little money and then get to be in a drawing every day. So that's a real fun event to talk a little bit of fantasy football, talk SFB, talk about Fantasy Cares, and give away jerseys and stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Nada. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat. We will talk to you next Tuesday.